It's been a gloriously warm, dry and sunny springtime for the past 3 weeks, which has made a brilliant change from the relentless 3 months of rain throughout the autumn and winter. It's been very good weather for honeybees. They've been out already for a month or more collecting pollen and nectar. But this morning is a little bit cold and damp and not very conducive to dealing with honeybees or their hives. But no doubt the weather will change again very soon and warm up, perhaps tomorrow. So all the vacant hives must be prepared, ready to attract a passing swarm of honeybees. It's only April, but it has been known that bees will swarm in April, increasingly more so as the Aprils get warmer. But usually it's May or June when one expects to find honeybees swarming. So let's go armed with my essential oils and see what types of hives there are around the forest garden. On a hill
near a wood,
where nobody goes,
up a track,
through a gate,
the food forest grows,
with secrets and treasures for everyone's pleasure, and Rob's discovery. This is a national hive, and most people who keep bees, in this country at least, will keep them in this sort of hive. They've been used for the past 100 years or so, especially by people who keep bees the so-called traditional way. I've used them for 14 years or more, since I began to keep bees, but now I still use them, but in a slightly different way to which they were intended. The national hive consists of a roof, a floor, and a series of vertically stacked boxes of 2 different sizes. There is the deep box that's called the brood box, and that's where the queen is kept by virtue of a piece of material called a queen excluder, and because she's a little bit bigger than the rest of the worker bees and the drones, she's not able to squeeze through, and therefore she cannot lay her eggs in the shallower boxes above that are called supers. So those boxes are filled with honey, but because the queen is artificially not allowed through, therefore she can't lay any eggs, and there can be no brood in those boxes. They are just for honey that the beekeeper will systematically remove and take off for themselves. And the brood box, the deep boxes, are where all the eggs are laid and most of the action takes place. I used to keep bees that way, and now I keep them in a very, very different way. In fact, keep isn't the right word. I'm not even a beekeeper. I create habitat for bees, I create homes for them, and I let the swarms come and go as they please, depending on what's best for the bees. In fact, when I first started this forest garden project, I had 8 or 9 different hives set up around the plot in my arrogance, thinking they were all the perfect habitat for honeybees to move into. And then, just to teach me a lesson, a swarm of bees moved into a pair of Wellington boots in my shed. So it shows what I know, doesn't it? And although I'm still using these national hives, because I still have the equipment, I'm using them in a slightly different way. I have taken out all the queen excluders, allowing the queen free roam of the hive, and I hardly ever open them up to manipulate the frames and to move them around, so effectively I just let the bees build wild comb. So I manage these national hives in the same way that I would a Warre hive, which is the hive type we're moving on to next. But first, we must make this hive attractive to any scout bees. So first, I will sprinkle a few drops of lemongrass oil inside, because lemongrass and lemon balm oil, in fact, smell very similar to the queen bee pheromone. It's a very citrusy sort of smell, and although it doesn't replicate it exactly, it's just enough to make the scout bees that honeybees send out before the rest of the swarm follows interested enough to go inside and perhaps make a home there. I will also smear a few drops of lavender oil around the entrance just to get the scout bees' attention, to make them think this is a viable home and to get them to come close to it. Unlike the other hives on site here, these national hives are the only ones that use frames. The others simply have top bars from which the bees can make their comb. The main reason for this is because when these hives are used in the traditional way and there's intensive management, it's very easy to take the frames of comb out to inspect them and to move them around. And also when it comes to honey extracting time, the combs could be taken out easily on the nice neat frames and extracted. The shallow super boxes use shallow frames, and the deeper brood boxes use longer, deep frames. I don't use frames anymore. I just use the very top of the frames called top bars, but I've left the frames in this hive just for ease of use, but I do let the bees build wild comb as they choose. It's now absolutely pouring with rain. I'm getting soaked, so let's have a break and we'll come back and talk about Warre hives when it's a little bit drier. Because it's so cold and wet today, this film is rather devoid of any honeybee action. But if that's what you're after, then I have a few other films with honeybees in. The three main ones on this channel are called May Bees and Lasagna Gardening, Swarm Chasing. Typical, isn't it? Go inside for 3 minutes and there they go. There they go. There are probably 50,000 bees there. And Summer Solstice Swarming. So have a look at those and see what you think. I'm about 30 feet from the hive and the air is thick with buzzing. Oh, they have swarmed. There they are, on that blackcurrant bush just there. It's now 3 hours later and I'm a little bit drier. Still quite wet in the air, very good for the garden. The Warre hive by a monk, a French monk I believe, who invented it, called Abbé Émile Warre. I ought to have saved the best till last, but I couldn't wait, as this is the hive I have had most success with over the years. It's another vertical top bar hive, and by vertical I mean the boxes are stacked up vertically, as opposed to the horizontal hive we'll be looking at next. And that takes advantage of the fact that bees love to build comb downwards. And this is another top bar hive. It's frameless, so it just has rows of bars in the top of each box. One there, one there. And there are gaps between these bars about a bee space wide, so that the bees can walk up and down and move up and down throughout the hive doing their work. But this hive has so many advantages. To start with, you don't need a whole load of equipment to manage it. You just need a suit just once a year when it's time to remove a box, which I'll explain about in a minute. And the other piece of equipment is simply a board with a bee escape on. There are many designs of these. This one's a plastic one, and it's a bit like a one-way valve for bees. And when it's time to take the box off to harvest the honey, 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on conditions, prior to taking the box off, you want to make sure it's completely empty of bees. So you slide in this on a board. You've got to get it the correct way up. That's right, that way up. So the bees crawl into this and they filter out the box, but they can't get back in again. So when you remove it, it is completely void of bees. They're safe, and you're safe. And the principle of managing it is because bees love to build downwards, you take the top box off every year, empty it for honey and wax and other bee products for yourself, and then with 2 strong friends ideally, you lift the hive and put that box back underneath. And you do this every year, so the bees are always building downwards. That has many advantages. To start with, the bees are far less likely to swarm because they never run out of space. The other advantage is the comb is being renewed every year, so there's never any old comb in there to get diseased. And the third advantage is the fact that it doesn't require opening it every week for management. There are no queen excluders, there are no frames to move around. And the reason that's done, mainly half the reason that's done in the national hive or other hives, is to stop them from swarming. But in the Warre hive, there's none of that. And by not opening it up all the time, just once a year, very importantly, all the atmosphere and the heat and the pheromones and all the medicinal volatile compounds are kept within the hive that otherwise, when it's opened, are lost. And just taking heat as an example, honeybees love to keep their hive at a constant 37.5 degrees centigrade, which incidentally is human body temperature. And when the lid is taken off to manage them, all that heat is lost, and they take 3 days for it to build back up again. And that's important for a number of reasons to keep it hot in there. One of the important reasons is that the varroa mite, that blood-sucking parasite that most honeybees in the world have, especially Europe, is that the varroa mite thrive at slightly lower temperatures, 35, 36 degrees, but they can't really tolerate it at 37.5 or above. So by keeping the hive hot, the Warre hive has very thick wood, and they can keep the temperature they like in there by not opening it. The mites are far less likely to thrive. And there are a couple of other ways in which the Warre hive tackles or helps the honeybees to tackle the varroa mite. The other one, it's not specifically unique to the Warre hive. You can do this in any hive, but I just happen to have done it with this one, as well as others. And that is, I've put what I've called a fake forest floor in it. It's not my idea, but just before the bees moved in, I took a handful of detritus from the woodland floor, lots of wood chips and rotting leaf matter. And when the bees groom themselves to get these mites off, in most hives they fall down to the floor and then they just crawl back up the edges and reattach themselves to the bees. But if you've got a living fake forest floor in there, I say fake, it's like a real forest floor really, then all the microorganisms like earwigs that can eat several varroa mites in one sitting, then the mites get gobbled up, so they're not a problem so much for the bees. There are several different designs of Warre hive. Many people prefer to make their own because they're so simple, but this one has windows in the back, which is very useful, so you can see how the bees are doing and how far down they have built. If you don't have windows, there are other ways to tell, just by putting your ear to the hive and tapping it and listening. And like the national hive, just there, the Warre hive has a good solid floor and a solid roof. But most Warre hives, because the emphasis is on keeping the heat up and insulation, they often have a top box that is filled with some kind of insulation, like well, it could be anything really, on the top to keep the heat in, to keep the hive temperature up. Most national hives don't have that, but I used an old super, the shallow box, to put an insulated roof on that national hive, because I am using it in the same way you would a Warre, taking the top box off every year, emptying it, then putting it back underneath. This Warre hive, or Warre hive, is only 3 boxes high at the moment, but I have seen them 5, 6, 7 boxes high, and I do have another box here to put on. Hello, that smells divine. This has had bees in it before, that's why, so it still smells very, very sweetly of honey. And you can see it's simply a box, and it's got a viewing window in the back. There's a lot more to say about this, but I shall leave it there. Time for the next hive. You may have noticed that some of the hives on site have big roof-like structures covering them, whereas some don't. And the reason is that I've found over the years that the hives that have covers on to protect them from the elements do far better than the ones that don't. So I'm slowly building the covers as I find the materials a little bit at a time. One of the reasons for this is that although bees can tolerate... Hello duckies! Hello girls! Although bees can tolerate quite cold winters, they have trouble tolerating long, damp winters. So by keeping a lot of the rain off, they can work later into the winter time and start earlier in the spring. There are two types of hive under this particular cover. The first of which is the African style horizontal top bar hive. I say African because that's where it's currently used, but before that it was used in Greece and Egypt. Although I'd recommend a Warre hive for a complete beginner, well, to most people actually, if you really want some management of the bees, to have a hands-on experience, albeit a light one, then the horizontal top bar hive is the way to go. This one came in kit form, and quite often when you buy them from companies or on the internet, the wood is quite thin, and that's usually because they're used in hot countries where they don't need much insulation. So lots of people who use these in this country like to add extra layers of insulation on top. I've just used cardboard here, but it needs a little bit more than that really. But this cover helps a huge amount. And how this differs from other hives, apart from being horizontal, is that the top bars, all along the top, the place from which bees anchor their comb, they don't have gaps between them because there's no need. The bees don't have to move up and down throughout the hive because it's horizontal. They just move laterally. And that's good because it means that when you take the roof off the hive, there is still a solid layer underneath where all the bars are touching, so none of the heat or pheromones or atmosphere from the hive is lost. So you can just expose the little bit that you are working on without disturbing the whole of the hive. This is a hive tool. This is probably the only thing you need to manage this hive, apart from a suit. You can see here that the bees that moved in last year, before they unfortunately got killed by hornets, started to build some comb. And I'm going to leave that in there because that'll be very useful to attract any more honeybees this year. But I will still add the lemongrass oil like before, because the scout bees really can't resist that. A little bit of lavender around the entrance too. Many of the hives have viewing windows in the back, so you know exactly which section to work on before opening it and what the bees are doing. Many of them also have two entrances. That's not just to give the bees a choice, it's because you can put a dummy board, a divider board in the middle, and actually have two colonies on the go at once in the same hive, because there's a divider between them, so the queens won't meet and won't fight to the death. And you can face the entrances in different directions and work two colonies at once. you can see these top bars have a groove down the middle, and that is to encourage the bees to build comb in that direction so that the bars are easy to take out with the comb on them. You don't want the bees cross-combing, which is where they build the comb sideways along the bars, and they're very difficult to get out that way. Last year I painted them with shellac wax, which is very similar in chemical composition to beeswax. I dissolved it in methylated spirits, painted it on, and then let the vapours evaporate before replacing the bars, and that encourages the bees just to start building comb and build it in the right direction. I've actually had quite a lot of success with this hive as well, except when it comes to the winter time, and on a couple of occasions I have lost colonies of bees because they just didn't survive the winter. But now that I've got this cover over it, I'm hoping for better things this year. Oh, my shoe fell off. Now this other hive, this rather special one, this one is by far the most different of all the hives. It's a Siberian style log hive. This particular one is inspired by the book series The Ringing Cedars of Russia. It is different in that it has nothing inside, no frames, no bars, nowhere for the bees to attach their comb. This one is 6 scaffolding planks connected together in a hexagon shape to mimic the cells in a bee comb. It doesn't need to be hexagon shape. This one's a little bit over-engineered. It really just needs to be a box shape, and just to make it a little bit more rounded for the bees, because bees prefer rounded spaces. You can just put triangular inserts of wood into the corners. But this one is about 3 feet long, and it's about 1.5 feet wide in diameter inside, and it really just mimics a hollow tree, which is the preferred space for bees, honeybees, to make their home naturally. It has a series of slits. It would ideally be up the south-facing side. I tried that for a number of years, but the wind almost always blows from the south here right into the hive. So this one is facing west. And there are a number of slits in the front, about 1 centimetre wide, and then the slits that the bees aren't using, they'll just seal up with propolis, the bee glue, and when they are using them at a busier time of year, they'll just open them up again. You'll notice that it's tilted at a 30-degree, more or less, angle. One of the reasons for that is the bees can start to build their comb when they first move in at the top, where it's highest and warmest, and slowly build down towards this lower end. And the other reason is, I mean, it's wonderful to keep honeybees for honeybees' sake, for their benefits and their pollination, but it's nice just to take a little something once in a while, like a tithe. So this has a removable cap at the lower end, and when the bees are doing really well, you can reach inside, ideally with a gloved hand, and break off some honeycomb. And because the removable cap is at the lower end, it means, like with the Warre hive and the horizontal top bar hive, that none of the heat, atmosphere or pheromones are lost when you do that, so there's minimal disturbance. There's no management with this one. It's a very extensive approach to beekeeping rather than intensive, and it's good to have a few of these, and then the bees can swarm when they want to, which is their way of replicating themselves, of breeding, and they'll just move in to the unoccupied log hives, and they'll come back again when they're ready. This has rough wood on the inside, and that's another way to help bees combat the dreaded varroa mite. Imagine if you're a honeybee having a blood-sucking beast the size of a dinner plate stuck to your back all the time. And bees do groom each other to get these mites off, but this has rough wood inside, so the bees can actually itch themselves against the wood to help get the mites off. And again, like with the national that I'm using as a Warre and the Warre hive itself, I've put a fake forest floor in this one, all kinds of bits of wood and chippings. Although until the bees move in, I've got to keep it moist, otherwise it'll dry out and all the creatures will die. So let's hope for a swarm soon. And just to ensure that the scout bees will find it, my two favourite bee baiting oils, lavender and lemongrass. Lemongrass, wonderful stuff. It's the lemongrass. It's the lavender. Generally, when you're trying to attract a swarm of honeybees, the higher up you can have the hive, the better. I mean, strapped in a tree or under the eaves of your house would be ideal if you can get it that high. This one is just on legs here, partly for ease of access and partly because none of my trees are tall enough yet. But this next and last hive I'm going to show you has been custom made especially for me to get it as high as possible to increase the chances of attracting a swarm. You may also have noticed that the hives are spread out around the site, not all in one place. Many beekeepers choose to keep all their hives in one place for easy management. That's called an apiary. But there are two reasons why they're spread out here. One is so that when the bees swarm, they like to go as far away from their existing nest as possible, especially when they divide in two and one half goes away to start a new colony. So by having the hive spread out, there's more chance of catching half of the colony when it comes out to start a new home. The second reason is that for some unknown reason, honeybees love to make their homes where there's underground water flowing. I don't know why, perhaps you have some ideas, but there is underground water flowing here. And over the 14, 15, or is it 16 years that I've been keeping bees around the area, even though, as I mentioned before, in my arrogance, I thought that there was the perfect hive down at the bottom of the field, they would still choose to move into a cardboard box a few feet further away up the field. And it was over time I noticed a pattern, and that is they would always choose to move into different homes in an exact line between that oak tree just there and that ash tree behind me. And I came to realise that was exactly the route of the spring that emerges further down, that was flowing underground. The grass was always more lush there, and trees always grew faster and better, and also it makes sense because of the places it emerges from the ground up and down the hill. So, bees, eh? I'm not really sure what to call this one. I would say bait hive, but the word bait has connotations that I'm trying to trap the honeybees when really they'll just move in of their own volition. So it's called maybe a welcome hive. Oh, that's divine. It's made from cedar wood, and cedar is the very best wood to make hives from. It's what bees would choose naturally over anything else because of its antibacterial properties. Fungus and mould never grows on it, and it's sterile inside, which is a lot less work for the bees having to keep it sterile as they would otherwise. The size of this one has been determined by the length of the top bars, because if bees move into this one and I wish to transfer them to my horizontal top bar hives, the comb that the bees may build from these bars can then be transferred directly into the horizontal hive, thus making room for any more swarms to move into this one, where they're more likely to than the horizontal, because this one's higher up and the bees will probably prefer it. So when a swarm arrives, I will decide whether to transfer them to a fresh hive or whether to just leave them in here to live their life. This was very kindly built for me by my friend Sam Winsley, master carpenter, and he's designed it so that I can get it up, way up there in the rafters. He's cleverly put these coach bolts, these 4 coach bolts and these brackets to hold it on, to bolt it on up there. And he's also very kindly lent me his spade drill bit because I don't have one. So the next job is to fix it up there. Again, trusty lemongrass and a little bit of lavender. Well, thank you for the drill bit, Sam, but I don't think my drill's powerful enough to get through this wood. Any ideas? Just keep charging it up and just do a little bit each day. Yeah, okay, well, let's see what we can do. Now all the hives are ready for their tenants, so all we have to do is put out the welcome mat and wait for some sunny weather. Time to go and get warm now, have some victuals. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon. Bye!